Good day. I'm Sergio Lugo, representing the Rocky Mountain Philatelic Library and the Rocky Mountain Stamp Show. As the moderator for the presentation, you will see on the first Postage Due stamps of Peru, issued between 1874 and 1909. I'd like to take this moment to thank you for your attendance. Our presenter is Chuck Wooster. His exhibit on the Postage Due issues of Peru has won 3 gold grand awards. He has been collecting Peru for 28 years and is the co-founder and president of the Peru Philatelic Studies Circle. He is on the board of trustees of the American Philatelic Research Library, is the secretary-treasurer of the American Philatelic Congress, is an accredited philatelic judge, and expertises Peru for the American Philatelic Society. Besides Peru, his other collecting interest is illustrated mail from 19th century bridge contractors. Chuck is a 1970 graduate of Ohio State University with a degree in civil engineering. He is retired, having spent his career as an executive with several heavy construction companies. Please welcome Mr. Wooster.
Thank you, Sergio. Peru was the 8th postal administration to issue Postage Due stamps, and the first one in the Americas, first one outside of Europe, really. And the first issue was actually issued in 1874, but it lasted for 35 years. There wasn't a lot of these printed, and so there's not a lot of surviving postal history. But they were printed by the National Banknote Company, and then later by the American Banknote Company. So why did Peru decide to do postage dues? Well, between 1871 and 1873, the volume of incoming mail received at post offices in Peru increased 55%, but the collection of deficiency decreased 38%. And now the deficiencies came from 2 places. It came from short paid domestic mail, because prepayment of mail was mandatory by this time, and it also came from assessment of local postage on incoming foreign mail. Probably that was the biggest source of the revenues. So a brief history of the stamps. The contract with the National Banknote Company was signed in Lima on December 13th of 1873, and the contract specified several design elements. That the stamp would have the image of the SS Adriatic, it would have an image of a llama, and the wording deficit or franquillo, which means deficit or payment. Stamp size was to be determined by the National Banknote Company. The stamps were to be slightly punched, and the delivery was to be in 105 days or by March 28th of 1874. And the total cost in British pound sterling was 236 pounds. The SS Adriatic, everybody knows, that was on the 12-cent 1869 US stamp. It was also on the banknote from the Citizens Bank of Louisiana. It was also used as letterhead for the Adriatic Insurance Company. So it was a stock image that the National Banknote Company had. This is the photocopy of the order book. And you can see that in the order that was posted in their book in January of 1874, there was an engraving charge of 40 pounds each for 4 plates of 100 stamps. And then there was a printing charge of 7 pounds per 1,000 sheets for 11,400 sheets. And then in the delivery section, there's actually 2 deliveries. And the first delivery was sent on February 27th, probably arrived in Lima around the 1st of April, slightly thereafter. And the second shipment was sent a week later. There was actually 4 stamps, 5, 10, 20, and 50 centavos. And this is the quantities printed of each stamp. The 50 centavo was only 40,000 copies were printed, but in 1879, they issued another order for 100,000 copies. And the reason for that will be revealed later in this presentation. These stamps were grilled. They're not grilled with the same grills on US stamps, but there are similar grills. They were using the same procedure, of course. They're slightly larger than the F grill, and some examples of split grills that are known. There are some essays, and we're not really sure about these essays. These essays are somewhat similar to the definitive stamps that the National Banknote Company also printed in 1874. And I think it's thought that these essays were actually produced prior to the contract being signed, because the contract actually describes a stamp that did not exist as an essay at that time. And the other noticing thing that these stamps have the word deficit in them instead of Franc or deficit. And then in 1879, they ordered a 1 centavo stamp in preparation for joining the UPU. These stamps were actually printed by the American Banknote Company because the merger between the two entities had occurred by then. And it was also grilled. And this is a copy of the letter from Peru to the National Banknote Company because they weren't aware of the merger at the time. And once again, it includes a sketch of what the stamp should look like. They specified that the stamp should have the coat of arms on it, and it should say deficit only, no Franc. And the price was, for this one issue, was now $600 US. And I'm not sure why the currency was quoted originally in pounds and now it's in dollars. Proofs of all these stamps issues exist. These were proofs that were done during the engraving process. Of the 50 centavos, you can see, I think that's February 13th, 1874. The engraving had been done probably then within 30 days. And they produced these approval proof. And then, of course, there are also plate proofs exist of all these issues. There's also an unissued stamp. But we really don't know much about the unissued stamp either because it's not mentioned in the contracts. We're not sure when this was done. It does have the imprint of the National Banknote Company on it. And we're not sure if this was done in lieu of the 1 centavo stamp or if it was done at the time and just not issued. But die proofs and plate proofs exist of this stamp. During this period of time, just a brief history of these stamps. First of all, the earliest reported usage is May 5th of 1874. Later, Chile declares war on Peru. 2 months later, Peru joins the UPU. In December, Peru experiences inflation and requires foreign mail to be paid in silver currency or with depreciated stamps, one or the other. In January of 1881, Chile occupies Lima and most of the coastal cities of Peru. December of 1881, they take control of the postal system. October 83, Peru signed peace treaty, and December, Peru regains control of the post offices, but then immediately civil war erupts. And the only other thing of importance is that in January of 1896, Peru declares, devalues their currency, which automatically doubles their outgoing postage rates. Now, there were a number of overprints. During this whole period of time, there were a number of overprints that were put on these stamps. The first one was the UPU Plata Lima overprint. They did not put the UPU Plata Peru overprint on these stamps, but they did put the Plata Lima overprint on them. These overprints were applied one stamp at a time. They were hand stamped. So it makes discerning legitimate copies from false a little difficult because there's a lot of variation in hand stamp application. There were only 2 reported covers with these stamps on them. And then there was a very short-lived overprint where an old postal device, a canceling device, was put on stamps. It was only used for about 6 weeks in Lima, right before the Chileans took control of the post office. There are no known covers, but there are dated stamps with the correct date. This is a 26 November 81 date stamp, so it falls within that period, and so it would appear that that is a legitimate used stamp. And then, of course, after the war, Peru applied triangles to the remaining inventories of stamps, and also there are some stamps with both the two-platter Lima overprint and the triangle. And then there was a small Franc overprint. This overprint was applied in the first half of 1884. This was after the peace treaty with Chile was signed. Chile kept troops in Peru, waiting for ratification of the peace treaty by both Bolivia and Peru. And supposedly these stamps were given to Chilean troops to be used on local mail within Peru. And there are actually 11 surviving covers with these stamps on them. And then in 1897, Peru once again ran out of the high-value postage due stamps, the 50 centavo stamp. And so they applied the deficit overprint to some definitive stamps to be used as postage due stamps. And then following that, they applied this deficit overprint to all the remaining inventory of the 1, 5, 10, and 20 centavo postage due stamps. And these were applied by the Lecoq machine. And we don't know the quantities of either of these, any of these overprints. The quantities are unknown. And then, in 1897, they took 30,000 copies of the 1 centavo stamp and put a Franc overprint on it. Half of these stamps, ostensibly because of a stamp shortage, but half of these stamps were purchased by a stamp dealer in Lima, Williams and Company. And I suspect that this was not done for a postal shortage, but simply to create an item that could be sold to the philatelic market. And then in 1902, the low-value postage due stamps became somewhat unavailable. And so they devalued the 20 centavo stamp with another overprint. These, I think, were applied by hand, about an un centavo. And there are 5 reported covers with this stamp, and then there's a 5 centavo devaluation, and I think there's only 2 reported covers with this stamp. And then in 1902, they just ran out. So they ordered more stamps. The American Banknote Company still had the plates. So in 1902, they printed 100,000 of the 1 centavo, 150,000 of the 5 centavos from the old plates, and these were all ungrilled. Specimens, overprints exist on these. In 1904, they ordered 100,000 copies of the 10 centavo. There's a slightly different specimen overprint on this stamp. And in August of 07, they ordered the quantities of all 4 values. But then in March 4 of 1909, they took them out of service. They bought a new issue in. So the vast majority of the August 1907 quantities, which didn't arrive in Peru until the end of 07, were only available for use for about 14 months. And so most of them ended up sold at auction and ended up in dealers and collectors' hands. And those are, to some extent, are the source of a vast number of forgeries. So any ungrilled stamp with an overprint on it is automatically a forgery. The latest usage of these stamps was actually it was on a cover. I found on the cover in 1911. The cover is it's an unfranked cover from Paillita. It's got a receipt cancel of Paillita of March 10th, 1911. And of course, at that time, the postage rate was 5 centavos. So a double deficiency is 10 centavos, and it's a bisected 20 centavo stamp. What I really wanted to talk about was what these stamps were used for in Peru. And I have compiled a census of 435 covers over the last 20 years. I think it's fairly complete. I only add 2 or 3 covers a year now. And I've broken up into 7 different categories. Pre-UPU incoming foreign mail. The stamp was assessed collecting local postage. Penalty for reuse of stamps. Official mail, judicial covers, foreign short-paid mail, domestic short-paid mail, and used as postage. First of all is pre-UPU usages. This is the largest source of these covers. Even though this is only for 4 or 5 years, from May of 1874 to June of 1879, found 115 surviving covers, mostly from Great Britain, United States, France, and then various other countries. Most of this mail is survived because it's addressed as business mail. So it survived in archives, which came onto the philatelic market. A lot of them came from the Graham Rowe and Company in Lima, which was a importer. There were a couple of things about these stamps. First of all, it was required that the stamps be applied to the back of the cover instead of the front. And also that the stamps were essentially, because of some confusion, for the first almost a year and a half, they were uncanceled, predominantly uncanceled. And so this is a May 1875 letter from London to Lima, and you can see the stamp is uncanceled. This is the only registered incoming foreign mail cover with these stamps. Postage was 1 shilling 6 pence. The registration was 4 pence, so it was a correct postage from Great Britain at the time was correct. And it was assessed not only the 10 centavos local postage, but also the 30 centavos local registration fee, which was in effect in Peru locally at that time. This is one of the covers from Cuba. Actually, the Cuban covers are the prettiest of the lot, I think. They're all addressed to the same company in Lima, Cohen and Company. Most of them came by British packet, but a couple of them came by French packet, and there's one cover that actually went through New York. And this is the one by British packet. And then, of course, we have the rare covers, which I have not seen, but I've seen them in a catalog. This is the one from Sweden to KO in February of 1875. This is the one from Smyrna in Turkey in July of 1878. And I think there's 5 covers from Italy. These all came in the market in the last few years, the Italian covers. This is February of 1875, and once again, it's not canceled, which was typical for that time period. And then we have 2 pieces of mail. We have 1 postcard during this period. This is from Uruguay. It was in 1879. I think if you look real closely, you can see that this cancel says 1873, but that's incorrect. Peru cancel says 1879. Uruguay had not joined the UPU, so this was just incoming foreign mail, and there was no postcard rate in effect, so it got charged 10 centavos even though it wasn't a letter. And then, of course, this is the only one piece of printed matter. This is 1876 French journal. It was assessed 60 centavos, postage due, and I think it was based entirely on the rate of the cover. 10 centavos per half ounce, or actually for 15 grams, because when Peru introduced these postage due stamps, they changed their rate determination from ounces to grams. It's essentially the same time. Now, the second category is the penalty for reuse of stamps. This is the earliest cover. You can see that the used stamp that was reused is missing, but you can see the remains of a cancel that's the Stampilla Savida, which means used stamp. That time, in 1875, the 1866 penalty in the Reglamento said essentially that if you reuse a stamp, you'll be charged twice the required postage. But if you didn't put a stamp on as an unpaid, instead the postage rate was 10 centavos. If you didn't put a stamp on, the double deficiency is 20 centavos. So it doesn't make sense to penalize a reused stamp the same as a unpaid letter. So I think that what they meant was it would be doubled again in 40 centavos. And so this is exactly what this has on it. It has 2 20 centavo stamps, doubling that penalty. There were actually 21 surviving covers, making up 5% of the total inventory. This was 1876. The penalty increased at that time. A year later, the penalty increased to 10 times the value of the used stamp. So we have a 10 centavo stamp, the same Stampilla Savida cancel, and now the penalty is 100 centavos collected by 250 centavo stamps. The other thing I should say is that the regulations required that any time a used stamp was found, that the cover was forwarded to Lima for processing, even though it might not have routed through Lima normally. So I think all these hand stamps were actually applied in Lima. This is the most common stamp. It's a circular stamp. It says it's Stampia Usada, and you'll see that next to whatever the reuse stamp was. This black or gray 10 centavo stamp was frequently reused because it was very easy to disguise the erasure of a cancel on a black stamp. There are a couple other markings. There's a straight line Stampia Usada. I think there's only one cover with that stamp, with that cancel. And then there's a straight line Stampia Servita. There's only one cover with that cancel. Official mail. Official mail, there are 33 surviving covers. And we don't really understand official mail because I don't think we found any regulations about what happened to official mail during this period. Prior to the introduction of the postage due stamps, official mail was simply required the hand stamp of the sending office and a designation, either Servicio Nacional or SN for short. But after introduction of these stamps, we have found a number of usages. The problem is that of the 33 covers, 30 of them go to this office in Huancavelica, the fiscal cashier office in Huancavelica. All 30 of them go to the same office. They all go through a very narrow date range from May 4th of 1874 to September 6th of 1876. And there are no official covers with postage due stamps after this period of time. So I don't know whether if this regulation was put in effect and then it was just lost after the war with Chile started. But at first glance, this might look like a unpaid single rate cover with a double deficiency. But looking closer, we find a number of these covers have 30 centavos postage on them, which would in effect be a 15 centavo rate if it was unpaid. But that rate didn't exist. We're pretty sure these are all large covers. We're pretty sure most of these covers are just heavy. There are a couple covers that do not fall in this category. This is one of them. It almost looks too good to be true. It's got the nice hand stamp here from these are islands off of the coast of Trujillo. It's sent to Trujillo. It's actually sent to a court in Trujillo. It's got the correct Servicio designation on it, and 2 20 centavos stamps. Might have been a double rate cover. It's hard to know because we just don't have the regulations, and we don't have enough examples to actually know what was happening here. Judicial covers. Judicial covers are known from prior to when Peru issued stamps. During the classic period, all the multi-franc covers that you see in exhibits now have classic stamps on them and paying heavy rates because these covers enclosed lots of documents. There are 47 surviving covers with postage due stamps in my census. They are all wrappers containing documents for civil cases. They all have a statement on the back that says this wrapper encloses judicial documents related from a lawsuit from Party A to Party B with postage to be paid by the recipient. So I think none of these covers, these are not short paid covers. These are just covers where the collection of the postage was delayed. I think these covers were actually kept at the court, and the money was collected from the recipient after he came in to collect, because they're all addressed to a court. They're not addressed to an individual. They're all addressed from one court to another court, and it makes no sense for the post office to retain them. I think they were retained by the court, and these eventually became available to collectors. This is an example of the designation on the reverse. Once again, it contains judicial papers for a court proceeding between Party A and Party B with postage to be paid by the receiving party. I think it's signed and dated by the clerk of the court. And this is where the high value postage due stamps were used, because these were heavy covers. So all these 50 centavo stamps were used up primarily on these judicial covers. Most of them were eventually destroyed, but some of them have found their way into the philatelic market eventually. This is probably one of the heavier ones. This has 7 sols, 80 centavos postage on it, which is equal to 2.6 pounds. At that time, it also required a cloth wrapper instead of a paper wrapper. So this is actually a linen wrapping. You can see that they didn't have very many 50 centavo stamps because it's almost all franc with 10 centavo stamps. This is the back of them. The back of that cover, there is one 50 centavo, there's 2 5s. There's a number of bisected 10 centavo stamps on this cover too, which means they were probably pre-bisected. And then they got this heavy cover in and they just were grabbing stamps from wherever they could find them. A foreign short paid mail. There's only 62 surviving covers, only 14% of the total. I'm excluding covers before Peru joined the UPU, but still, it's a 30-year period from 1879 to 1909. When Peru joined the UPU, its conversion rate was 1 centavo is equal to 5 centimes. And then in 1896, when they devalued their currency, their conversion rate became 1 centavo equal to 2.5 centimes. This is the earliest incoming UPU foreign cover. This is kind of a mystery cover because it looks like it's properly franked. It's franked with 2.5 pence, which was the UPU rate from England, 25 centimes, but yet it has a T marking on it, and it has maybe a 15 that was applied in England. We're not sure. A 15 centime deficiency doesn't make a lot of sense. Peru didn't know what to do with it, so they just doubled the 15 centimes marking and stuck 30 centavos postage due on it. This is way too much money. It should have been 6 centavos at 5 centimes per centavo. It's just a mystery cover. But most of them were handled correctly. This is a short paid letter from the United States. It's a double rate letter. It has 25 centimes deficiency on it. It was assessed 50 centimes, and at the conversion of 1 centavo equals 5 centimes, it was assessed a 10 centavo postage due. This is a letter after the rate change. This is once again from the United States. It was 3 cents short paid, or 15 centimes short paid. It should have been assessed 12 centavos, but it was only assessed 6 centavos. Because when I go through the census, I find that almost all covers from 1896 to 1904 were only assessed 1 centavo equals 5 centimes, except for a few instances. This is one I think is properly corrected. This is 1908. By that time, they were using the 2.5 centimes centavo. This is a letter from Chile. It's a double rate letter. It's properly franked for the single rate, but the second rate, the second 15 grams, was 10 centavos. At this time, Chile's conversion was 3.5 centimes per centavo, so it's incorrectly marked as 35 centimes, because by 1908, UPU required you mark a double deficiency. Well, Chile only marked a single deficiency, so it's incorrectly marked, but Peru doubled it to 70 centimes, and then they assessed 14 centavos postage due at the correct 2.5 centimes per centavo. Now, there was one unusual thing. Foreign unpaid mail. If a letter was completely unpaid, Peru charged 50 centimes, or double the UPU rate of 25 centimes. They also tacked on the maritime surcharge of 25 centimes that they applied to their outgoing mail. And they also tacked on the Panama transit fee of 5 centimes that they tacked onto their outgoing mail, even though this was incoming mail, resulting in an assessment of 80 centimes, equal to 16 centavos in 1879. This is a 1890 letter. This is a penalty rate letter. These penalty envelopes could not be used on foreign mail, so it's treated as completely unpaid. And you can see that correctly assessed it was 16 centavos, 10, 5, and 1. There's only a couple of these letters in existence. There are also a couple that look like this, where I think they just rounded up the 16 to 20 centavos. And then there are a couple letters after 1896, both of them from Germany, both of them completely unpaid. But for some reason, on this letter, they converted it at 2.5 centimes per centavo instead of 5 centimes per centavo. Now, I don't know why this might have been because it got more attention because it was completely unpaid, and maybe a more knowledgeable clerk looked at it. But there are actually two letters like this that are after 1896 that were properly assessed at the 2.5 centimes per centavo conversion rate. Domestic short paid, there's only 70 covers from 1874 to 1909. During this period of time, Peru always required a double deficiency. And so here's an unpaid letter from, forgive my pronunciation, from Juaz, and it was assessed 20 centavos postage due. But, once again, the advantages of having a census is that half the covers between 1878 and 1885, which is that period of turmoil between the war with Chile and the Civil War, half of them appear to be only assessed a single deficiency. So this is a cover that initially received a 20 centavo deficit penalty marking. Then it has a 10 centavo notation on top of it, and it was assessed 10 centavos. Bisects were legal at times in Peru, but at other times they were illegal. So this is a illegal bisect that, of course, they didn't cancel the stamp, and they treated it as completely unpaid, and they assessed a double deficiency of 20 centavos. And then some of the stamps in 1896 were retired from circulation. So we have a couple covers that were franked with older stamps. They were not canceled, and there was assessed a 10 centavos because at this time the internal postage rate dropped to 5 centavos. So this is a double deficiency of 10 centavos. And then used as postage. And this is one of the bigger categories, 87 surviving covers used as postage. The regulation said if the post office was out of stamps, they could use postage due stamps as postage. But the postmaster had to put a statement on the cover that said franked with stamps of deficit because we lacked postage stamps. And he had to sign it. And at this time, then the stamp is put on the front of the cover instead of the back of the cover. So these 87 surviving covers does not include the covers with that 1 centavo overprint stamp with Franc on it, because those actually are fairly prevalent. And then in late 1898, there was actually a shortage of stamps, and so officially they was allowed to use these on the internal mail. Postmaster no longer had to put that statement on the stamp. This lasted for about 3 months, and there's actually 14 covers from this period. These are the Franc overprinted stamps. Half of these stamps were sold to Williams and Company. Almost all of it was used on philatelic mail, so a lot of these covers survived. This is the cover to England. Postage is placed on the back. There's actually 22 centavos because when Peru devalued their currency in 1896, the postage rate on UPU went from 11 to 22 centavos. I'm not sure how many covers there are, but I've got at least 10 or 15 of them myself. There are quite a few of these covers in existence. And then there are the Franc overprints. These are the stamps that were given to the Chilean troops. This is used from Mollendo, which was the port in southern Peru that's connected by a rail to Arequipa. It's a bisected 5 centavo stamps because also following the war with Chile for about 9 months in 1884, Peru lowered their postage rates by 50%. So normally this would have been a 5 centavo charge because this was between post offices connected by rail. but it was reduced to 2 or 2.5 centavos, and there's a lot of bisected 5 centavo stamps on these covers. There are actually 11 of these surviving covers, and I think that's it. So I got plenty of time for questions.
One of your covers had the word reboot on it, R-E-B-U-T. I've never seen that word. Is that return?
Return.
Okay.
That's French, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it is French. Second, you had a cover with a French cancellation, a foreign marking cancellation for using a French octagonal. It's way back.
Oh yeah, I know where it is.
Okay. I wasn't sure what it was. I thought that was only used out of Puerto Rico, and I'm asking basically.
Oh, I don't know.
I'm asking basically if that was a universal French cancellation octagonal from throughout Europe. But yes, I thought that was only used out of Puerto Rico. No? Oh, please, Henry.
The octagonal is known from many different locations. Even there is one from Callao in Peru. It's quite rare, but they do exist. So there are Montevideo, many different places. There is a book about that, the sales book, Sayes. That one has everything about those things.
Thank you very much. It was confusing to me.
Well,
and
yeah,
go ahead.
because France had a limited packet service to the west coast of South America for 2 different periods, and once in the 1840s and again in the 1870s. They only lasted for a few years because they were in competition with the British company, the Pacific Steam Navigation Company.
Any questions?
You showed the one cover, or I think 2 of them, with muslin, the fabric. They said that they had to be placed in. Can you go back to those and explain the use of why that was done? I'm not familiar with that. They had to be placed, you said, inside a bag or something? Was that it?
Well, because it was 2.6 pounds. Based on the
okay.
postage. Because it was so heavy, the regulations required that it had a linen cover rather than a paper cover.
I want to compliment you for the presentation, the story you presented. It's very informative and impressive. I got a question on this judicial letters and the use of the postage due stamps. So I assume these are the correspondence between courts in different locations?
Yes,
And so they were handled by the Postal Service then?
yes.
And then the receiving court then paid this?
I think the receiving court held the documents until the party to the lawsuit came in and reimbursed them for the postage. And these covers are, there are quite a few of these covers, both with postage dues, earlier covers without postage dues, earlier covers without stamps, and then in the late 1890s, you see they go back to using more definitive stamps on these covers. Sometimes it's a mixture of postage dues. What's that?
Why would they not use regular stamps?
Well, they did. Before 1874, they used regular stamps. From 1874 to 1895, they used postage due stamps. Thereafter, they used mostly definitive stamps. Sometimes in combination with postage dues, sometimes not.
I'm sorry, folks. We have to end the questions now. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I would like to thank Chuck Wooster for sharing his expertise on the first Peruvian postage due stamps. For further information about the Peru Stamp Society, please visit their website. On behalf of the Rocky Mountain Philatelic Library, I'd like to thank you for having taken the time to visit with us on this video. The Rocky Mountain Philatelic Library is located in Denver, Colorado at 2038 South Pontiac Way. Our hours are 10 to 4, 5 days a week, with 1 day of extended hours. The library offers collectors of every kind and to the general public a host of materials that are related to stamp collecting and world history. There are over 60,000 journals contained in 800 specific journals. We have a map room, we have special collections devoted to individual countries, and we have special libraries that are devoted to individual countries. For further information about the Rocky Mountain Philatelic Library, We invite you to visit the library or visit us online at our website,